a high-stakes court case, a man framed for a crime he didn't commit, and a web of corruption that reaches far beyond the courtroom walls. Ethan Carter had it all: success, respect, a thriving career, until a single accusation shattered everything. Now, facing a ruthless prosecutor, a compromised judge, and a powerful corporate enemy, Ethan's only hope lies in a shocking piece of evidence brought forward by the last person he expected: his mother. But the truth is dangerous. As hidden forces work to silence him, Ethan must fight not just for his freedom, but for his life. What happens when the system meant to protect justice is the very thing that threatens it? Subscribe now and stay until the end to uncover the truth. Like, comment, and let us know where you're watching from. The air in the courtroom felt heavy. Margaret Carter, a woman known for her quiet strength, now stood at the center of a legal storm. Ethan, still in shock, watched as his mother handed the USB to his defense attorney, James Holloway. "Your Honor, I request a recess to review this new evidence," James said quickly. The court judge glanced at the prosecution. "Mr. Davidson, any objections?" Prosecutor Davidson, a sharp-eyed man with a reputation for being ruthless, hesitated. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The defense has had months to present evidence. This is an attempt to delay the proceedings." Margaret's voice cut through the debate. "This isn't about delay. This is about justice." The judge studied her, then turned to the bailiff. "We will take a 30-minute recess. The court proceedings will resume after the evidence is examined." A collective exhale filled the room. Ethan turned to his mother. "Mom, what are you doing?" he whispered urgently. Margaret looked at him, her gaze filled with determination. "Saving you, Ethan." As the court officers guided the attendees out for the recess, Ethan's lawyer quickly plugged the USB into his laptop. A video file appeared on the screen. Ethan leaned in, his pulse racing. The footage showed a late-night meeting in a private office. Two men sat at a desk. One of them was Brian Matthews, Ethan's longtime friend and chief financial officer. The other was a man Ethan recognized but had never met personally: Victor Langston, the CEO of a rival corporation. In the video, Brian slid a stack of documents across the table. "It's done? I altered the financial records to make it look like Ethan was the one manipulating the stocks." Victor smirked. "Good. Once he's convicted, Carter Innovations will collapse, and we'll take over the patents." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Brian, his friend, had betrayed him, and it had all been orchestrated by Langston. James clenched his jaw. "This is enough to get the court ruling reconsidered. If we prove this was a conspiracy, the case against you will fall apart." Ethan turned to his mother. "How did you get this?" Margaret hesitated before answering. "Because someone sent it to me, and I think they're in danger." Ethan's mind reeled. Someone had risked their life to expose the truth. But who? Before he could ask further, the bailiff's voice echoed through the court hall. "All rise. The court session is now back in order." The moment of truth had arrived. As the court session resumed, Ethan took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. His mother sat beside him, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her expression unreadable. His lawyer, James Holloway, adjusted his tie and stood. "Your Honor," James began, "the defense has just reviewed crucial new evidence that proves my client was framed. I request permission to present it to the court." Judge Whitmore, an experienced and no-nonsense woman, tapped her gavel. "Proceed, Mr. Holloway, but I warn you this had better be relevant." James stepped toward the court screen, where the bailiff had set up the video for playback. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as the lights dimmed slightly, and the screen flickered to life. The entire court audience, including the jury, prosecutors, and Ethan himself, watched in stunned silence as Brian Matthews, Ethan's former CFO, and Victor Langston, the ruthless CEO of a rival company, conspired against him. The video ended, leaving a deafening silence in the courtroom. James turned to the judge. "Your Honor, this video makes it clear that my client, Ethan Carter, was a victim of a calculated setup. The financial records were manipulated not by him, but by his trusted colleague. We move for an immediate dismissal of all charges. Prosecutor Davidson shot up from his seat, his face flushed with anger. Your Honor, this video could be doctored. We don't know where it came from, who recorded it, or how it was obtained. We need time to verify its authenticity before allowing it to influence this court case. Judge Whitmore considered his argument, then turned to James. Mr. Holloway, do you have any evidence proving the video's authenticity? Before James could respond, Margaret Carter stood up. Your Honor, if I may speak. A murmur spread through the court audience. Judge Whitmore narrowed her eyes. Mrs. Carter, you are not a witness in this court trial. What do you wish to say? Margaret's voice was firm. I received this video anonymously, but I had it examined by a forensic data analyst before bringing it to court. It has not been tampered with. Davidson shook his head. And where is this analyst? Why aren't they testifying? Margaret's lips tightened. Because they have disappeared. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Ethan stiffened. Someone had gone missing after uncovering this evidence? Judge Whitmore's gaze darkened. Are you suggesting that someone is trying to suppress this evidence? Margaret nodded. Yes, Your Honor. And I believe my son's life is in danger, just like the person who sent me this video. Davidson scoffed. This is speculation. Without proof, we can't delay the court verdict based on fear and paranoia. James immediately countered. Your Honor, this is more than speculation. The video alone casts serious doubt on the integrity of this court case. If we rush to a conviction without investigating further, we risk sending an innocent man to prison while the true criminals remain free. The court judge studied both attorneys before leaning forward. This case has just taken a serious turn. I am granting the defense 48 hours to verify the source of this video. If it proves valid, we will reconsider all charges. If not, we proceed with sentencing. Ethan exhaled sharply, his heart pounding. He had just been given a chance, but it came with a deadline. As the court proceedings were adjourned, Ethan turned to his mother. Mom, what else aren't you telling me? Margaret hesitated, then whispered, Ethan, there's more to this than you know. And I think I know who sent that video. Ethan's blood ran cold. Who? Margaret's eyes darkened. Someone you once trusted. Someone who is still watching over you from the shadows. The mystery deepened. And Ethan knew that the next 48 hours would determine not just his fate in court, but his very survival. Ethan sat in the court hallway, his mind racing. The revelation from his mother had shaken him. Someone he once trusted had sent the video. But who? And why had they risked their life for him? James Holloway paced beside him, checking his phone. I've reached out to a forensic expert I trust. If the file is genuine, we can force the court to reconsider all charges. But we need more than just this video. We need a witness. Margaret, standing tall despite the weight of the moment, spoke calmly. I think I know who sent it, but finding them won't be easy. Ethan frowned. Who is it? Margaret hesitated, then whispered a name that sent chills down his spine. Madeline Cross. Ethan's breath caught. Madeline? That's impossible. Madeline Cross had been his ex-fiancée. They had ended things 2 years ago after a bitter breakup, and she had left the country for a high-profile job in London. He hadn't heard from her since. James raised an eyebrow. Why would she help Ethan now? Margaret's expression was unreadable. Because she knows something. And because she still cares. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, still processing this information. Even if she did send the video, how do we find her? She's in London. Margaret pulled out her phone and tapped a message. She landed in New York this morning. She's at a hotel near the courthouse. But there's a problem. She told me she's being followed. Ethan tensed. Someone didn't want her talking. James nodded. Then we need to get to her before they do. Margaret placed a hand on her son's shoulder. Ethan, you need to be careful. This isn't just about the court trial anymore. Someone is willing to make people disappear to keep this buried. Ethan exhaled, then stood. Then let's go. We don't have much time. 30 minutes later, Ethan and James pulled up outside the small hotel near the courthouse. The tension was thick as they entered the dimly lit lobby. Margaret had texted Madeline, but there had been no response. James turned to Ethan. If she really has more evidence, we need to get her somewhere safe before the court hearing resumes tomorrow. They took the elevator to the 5th floor and hurried down the hall. Margaret knocked on room 507. Silence. Ethan's stomach tightened. Madeline? It's me, Ethan. A shuffling sound came from inside. Then the door creaked open a few inches. A pair of green eyes peered out, wary, exhausted. Madeline. Ethan, she whispered. You shouldn't have come. Before he could respond, she yanked them inside and shut the door. The room was a mess, papers strewn across the table, a laptop open to a financial report. The curtains were drawn tightly. Madeline, Ethan began, did you send the video? She nodded. Yes, but I didn't record it. James stepped forward. Then who did? Madeline swallowed hard. Brian Matthews. Ethan's jaw clenched. Brian? But he's the one who framed me. Madeline shook her head. Not willingly. Victor Langston forced him to do it. Brian was gathering proof to clear your name, but he was killed before he could submit it to the court. Ethan's heart pounded. Brian is dead? Madeline nodded. I found his encrypted files and knew I had to get them to you. But Langston's men are watching me. They'll do anything to stop this from reaching the court. A knock at the door made them freeze. James grabbed the laptop while Ethan positioned himself near Madeline. Margaret moved toward the window, checking outside. The knock came again. Harder this time. Ethan whispered, Madeline, who else knows you're here? Her face paled. Only you. The room fell silent. And then the door handle started to turn. The door handle twisted slowly, the metallic creak slicing through the silence. Ethan motioned for everyone to stay back, his pulse hammering in his ears. James gripped the laptop tighter, while Madeline clutched Ethan's arm, her breathing unsteady. Margaret stood near the window, watching for another escape. Another knock, louder this time. Madeline Cross. A deep voice called from the other side. Open the door. We need to talk. Ethan exchanged a glance with James. They had to act fast. Margaret whispered urgently, we need to get out of here. Now. Madeline's hands trembled as she pointed toward the adjoining door that led to the neighboring suite. It's unlocked. That's our way out. Ethan didn't hesitate. He motioned for his mother to go first, followed by James, who clutched the laptop as if his life depended on it. The knock became pounding. We know you're in there. Madeline pushed Ethan forward. Go. I'll be right behind you. As soon as the last of them slipped through, Ethan eased the door shut just as the main door burst open. Through the crack, he caught a glimpse of two men in dark suits scanning the empty room. She's gone, one of them muttered. Check the fire escape. Ethan signaled for silence as they crept toward the hallway. If these men were Langston's people, then the court trial was no longer just about legal battles. It was about survival. They slipped out of the hotel through a side exit, stepping into the cold New York night. The glow of the courthouse loomed in the distance, a reminder of the fight still ahead. We can't go back to your apartment, James said, glancing around. Langston's men are probably watching it. Ethan nodded. Then we go somewhere they wouldn't expect. Somewhere safe. Margaret gave him a knowing look. The one place Langston wouldn't dare send his people inside the courthouse itself. Madeline frowned. You think they won't follow us there? Margaret shook her head. Not if we're surrounded by federal agents and press. The court building has security cameras everywhere. If they make a move there, they risk exposure. James considered it. That might work. The safest place for the evidence is in the hands of the court. With no better plan, They hailed a cab and sped toward the courthouse. They arrived just before midnight. The streets were mostly empty, save for a few reporters still covering the ongoing case. The towering columns of the courthouse cast long shadows under the streetlights. As they stepped inside, a security officer at the entrance eyed them suspiciously. "We need access to the legal archives," James said, flashing his attorney ID. "Urgent case-related matter." The officer hesitated, but eventually nodded. "Fine, but no disruptions. The court offices are closed, so stay in the designated areas." They moved swiftly down the dimly lit corridor, heading for James's office. Madeline placed the laptop on the desk and opened the encrypted files. Brian had hidden backup copies of every fraudulent financial report Langston forced him to alter. "This is the evidence we need for the court hearing tomorrow." James exhaled in relief. "This should be enough to turn the court ruling in our favor." Ethan stared at the screen, his hands clenched into fists. His best friend had died trying to clear his name. Now, it was his responsibility to finish what Brian had started. A sharp knock at the door made them all jump. "James Holloway?" A voice echoed from outside. "FBI, open up." Ethan's heart sank. If the FBI was here, things had just become even more complicated. Ethan's breath hitched as the knock came again. "James Holloway, open up. This is the FBI." James exchanged a wary glance with Ethan before slowly stepping toward the door. Margaret placed a protective hand on Ethan's shoulder, while Madeline's fingers hovered over the laptop, ready to shut it at any moment. James exhaled, then unlocked the door. Two federal agents entered, their expressions unreadable. The taller one, Agent Russell, flashed his badge. "We need to speak with Ethan Carter." Immediately, Ethan straightened. "What's this about?" Russell's gaze flickered toward the laptop. "We have reason to believe you're in possession of sensitive evidence related to your court case. That evidence is now part of an active federal investigation." Ethan clenched his fists. "You mean my trial? The one where I'm being framed?" The second agent, a woman with sharp blue eyes, stepped forward. "We're aware of new developments in your case, Mr. Carter, and we know you've been targeted. That's why we're here to protect you." Madeline frowned. "Then why do I get the feeling you're also here to take the files before they reach the courtroom?" Russell sighed. "Because this goes beyond a single court trial. Victor Langston isn't just manipulating financial records, he's bribing officials, influencing federal contracts, and silencing witnesses. If you present this evidence in open court, you won't just be putting yourself in danger, you'll be exposing a much larger operation." Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. "And that's exactly why I need to present it in court." Russell hesitated, then handed Ethan a folder. "Read this before you make that decision." Ethan took the file, his stomach twisting. Inside were photos of Brian Matthews taken in the hours before his death. Bruised, terrified. A message scrawled on the wall behind him: "Silence or suffer." Margaret inhaled sharply. "My God!" James swore under his breath. "Langston isn't just covering up financial crimes. He's running an entire network of corruption." Ethan slammed the folder shut. "Brian died trying to get this to me. I won't let his sacrifice be for nothing. Tomorrow morning, I'm taking this to the courtroom, no matter what it costs me." Russell studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Then we'll make sure you live long enough to do it." The agents left, but the weight of their words lingered. Madeline turned to Ethan. "You're taking a huge risk. If you expose this in court, Langston will come after you with everything he has." Ethan met her gaze. "And if I don't, he wins. This trial isn't just about me anymore, it's about everyone he's hurt." James sighed. "Then we need to be ready. Langston will try to stop us before the court hearing even begins." Margaret stepped forward, her voice steady. "Then we stay here tonight. The courthouse is the safest place we can be." And tomorrow we walk into that courtroom together. Ethan nodded, determination burning in his chest. Tomorrow, the battle for justice would begin, and he would make sure the court heard the truth no matter the cost. Ethan barely slept. The weight of what he was about to do in court pressed down on him like a storm cloud ready to break. If he presented the evidence, Langston would retaliate. But if he stayed silent, Brian's death and everything his mother had risked would be for nothing. At dawn, James paced the dimly lit courthouse office, reviewing the case notes. Madeline sat by the window, her eyes scanning the street below for any signs of Langston's men. Margaret stood near Ethan, her presence a steady anchor in the chaos. "Are you sure about this?" Margaret asked softly. Ethan nodded. "Brian gave his life for this. I can't walk away now." James sighed. "Then we need to get to the courtroom before Langston makes his next move." As they stepped into the court hall, a clerk rushed toward them, his face pale. "Mr. Carter, there's been an issue." Ethan's stomach tightened. "What kind of issue?" The clerk hesitated. "The judge assigned to your case, Judge Whitmore, was found unconscious in her chambers this morning. They think it was poison." Margaret inhaled sharply. "Poison?" James swore under his breath. "Damn it. Langston is trying to control the court ruling." Before we even step inside the courtroom, Ethan clenched his fists. "Who's replacing her?" The clerk lowered his voice. "Judge Peter Calloway." James's face darkened. "That's not good. Calloway is rumored to have ties to corporate lobbyists. He's been accused of manipulating court decisions before." Madeline cursed. "Langston made his move. He bought the court." Ethan took a steady breath. "Then we expose him before he can shut us down." The courtroom was packed. Reporters, business executives, and legal observers filled the seats. Ethan spotted several familiar faces, former colleagues who had once admired him, now waiting to see him fall. Langston was there, sitting calmly at the prosecution's table. His smirk sent a wave of rage through Ethan. Judge Calloway entered, and the bailiff called the court to order. "This court session will resume proceedings in the matter of Ethan Carter versus the state," Calloway announced, his tone emotionless. James stood immediately. "Your Honor, the defense has obtained critical new evidence that could change the court verdict." Calloway arched an eyebrow. "New evidence? That's highly irregular at this stage." James remained firm. "The prosecution built their case on fraudulent reports. We now have proof that those reports were manipulated to frame my client." Davidson, the prosecutor, smirked. "If the defense has such groundbreaking proof, I assume they verified its authenticity?" James lifted the laptop. "We have forensic confirmation. The files came directly from Brian Matthews, who was murdered for attempting to expose this conspiracy." A ripple of murmurs spread through the courtroom. Langston's expression darkened. Calloway leaned back. "Very well. Present your evidence." Ethan's pulse quickened as James connected the laptop to the court screen. The video of Brian and Langston appeared. The court audience fell silent as they watched Brian confess to forging documents under Langston's orders. Ethan turned toward Langston, expecting panic. Instead, Langston smiled. Something was wrong. Judge Calloway suddenly sighed. "This is compelling, but unfortunately, it's inadmissible." Ethan's blood ran cold. "What?" Calloway gestured toward the prosecutor. "The defense failed to submit this evidence within the required court deadline. Per procedure, I cannot allow it to influence today's court ruling." James slammed his fist on the table. "Your Honor, this is absurd. We received the evidence just yesterday. Lives were lost to bring this to court." Calloway's gaze was cold. "I don't make the rules, Mr. Holloway. I simply enforce them." Ethan's heart pounded. Langston hadn't just bribed Calloway, he had rigged the entire court trial. Margaret's voice cut through the silence. "Then, let's take this beyond the courtroom." Everyone turned toward her. She stepped forward, eyes blazing. If this court won't hear the truth, the public will. And just like that, the game changed. A stunned silence filled the courtroom. Margaret's words had struck like a hammer against the rigid walls of legal bureaucracy. Judge Calloway adjusted his glasses. Mrs. Carter, this is a court of law, not a public forum. If you disrupt these proceedings again, I will hold you in contempt. Margaret remained unfazed. And if you silence the truth, Your Honor, history will hold you in contempt. Gasps rippled through the court audience. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicking. Calloway's jaw tightened. But before he could speak, James stepped forward. Your Honor, if the court refuses to accept our evidence, we will submit it to the press. The public deserves to know how this court case is being manipulated. Davidson, the prosecutor, scoffed. This is grandstanding. The court ruling is based on legal procedure, not public spectacle. James met his gaze. Then let the public decide whether they trust this court's verdict or not. Langston finally spoke, his voice smooth and confident. Your Honor, this is a mockery of our judicial system. If the defense cannot play by the rules of court proceedings, then they have no case. Ethan turned to Langston, his anger boiling over. You mean the rules you've been buying off? The rules that let you poison a judge and silence witnesses? Calloway slammed his gavel. Enough. This court session will maintain order. But it was too late. The tension in the courtroom had shifted. Ethan could see it, the jury members exchanging uneasy glances, the reporters whispering among themselves. The doubt had been planted. Margaret seized the moment. Your Honor, let the jury watch the evidence and decide for themselves. If they still think Ethan is guilty, we'll accept the court's ruling. But if you block it, the entire world will know why. Calloway hesitated. Ethan could see the gears turning in his head. If he outright denied the evidence now, it would only confirm that the court was compromised. After a long pause, Calloway sighed. The jury will be allowed to review the evidence. This court trial will reconvene in 1 hour. Ethan exhaled. A small victory, but the war wasn't over yet. An hour later, the courtroom was packed once more. The jury had watched the footage, their faces unreadable. The air was thick with tension as Judge Calloway resumed the court session. The jury has reviewed the new evidence, Calloway announced. Before we proceed with the court verdict, does the prosecution have anything to add? Davidson stood, his usual arrogance shaken. Your Honor, while the footage does raise questions, it does not conclusively prove my client's involvement in a larger conspiracy. Ethan's fists clenched. Even now they were trying to spin the narrative. James stood. Your Honor, Brian Matthews is dead. He died trying to bring this to court. His murder alone should warrant an independent investigation. Calloway looked at the jury. Has the new evidence influenced your decision? A middle-aged woman, the jury foreperson, stood. Yes, Your Honor. Given what we've seen, we can no longer say, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Ethan Carter is guilty. A rush of emotion surged through Ethan. Calloway's face remained unreadable. Then, after a long pause, he sighed. The charges against Ethan Carter are hereby dropped. This court is adjourned. The gavel struck. Ethan had won. But as he turned to his mother and James, he saw Langston standing calmly, his smirk unchanged. The battle in court was over, but the war with Langston had just begun. Ethan barely had time to process his victory before Langston approached, his smirk unwavering. You think this ends in the courtroom? Langston said, his voice a low whisper. You have no idea what you've just started. Ethan held his gaze, refusing to be intimidated. The court may have ruled in my favor, but you're not walking away from this. Langston chuckled. Oh, but I am. You see, I still have powerful friends, Ethan. You may have won this court case, but outside these walls, you're still a dead man walking. Before Ethan could respond, Langston turned and strode confidently out of the court hall. James exhaled sharply. We should have seen this coming. Langston was never afraid of the court's verdict. He's playing a bigger game. Margaret stepped closer, and now he sees Ethan as a real threat. Madeline frowned. Then we need to hit him before he hits us. Ethan's mind raced. Brian's files, there must be more in there. Something that can take Langston down completely. James nodded. We need to go through every document and find something damning enough that not even his connections in court can protect him. Margaret looked at Ethan. And we need to do it fast. That night, they gathered in James's office inside the courthouse, where they had temporary security. James pulled up Brian's encrypted files, scanning through endless financial statements, corporate emails, and private transactions. Madeline leaned over his shoulder. There's something here, a list of offshore accounts. These transactions don't match any records Langston submitted to the court. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Because they're bribes. He's been buying off court officials, politicians, anyone who could shield him. James clicked on another file. And look at this, Langston's emails. He mentions a contingency plan if the court ruling didn't go his way. Margaret's face darkened, meaning if he couldn't silence you in court, he'd find another way. Just then, the lights in the office flickered. The security monitors went black. James cursed. That's not a coincidence. Ethan moved toward the door when his phone buzzed. A message. Step outside and drop the case, or your mother won't live to see morning. His blood ran cold. They're here, Ethan whispered. Ethan turned to Margaret. We need to get you out of here. Now. Margaret shook her head. No. We finished this. James quickly copied the files onto multiple flash drives. If they think they can stop this by shutting us down, they're wrong. We'll submit these documents to a federal grand jury. Langston won't be able to rig that court hearing. Madeline looked at the darkened monitors. But first we need to get out of this building alive. They moved quickly through the court corridors, sticking to the shadows. As they neared the back exit, Ethan caught sight of two men in dark suits near the main doors. Langston's people. We take the side exit, James whispered. They slipped through a restricted hallway, past the empty court offices. Every step felt like a countdown. As they reached the exit, a car screeched to a halt outside. Ethan's heart pounded. This wasn't over yet, and he knew Langston wasn't going to let them walk away without a fight. The car outside idled ominously, its dark-tinted windows concealing whoever was inside. Ethan's instincts screamed danger. James clenched his jaw. We don't have time to hesitate. If we get caught here, Langston wins without ever setting foot in a courtroom again. Margaret placed a hand on Ethan's arm. We split up. If they're watching the exits, we need to move separately and regroup later. Ethan hated the idea of separating, but she was right. Okay, James. And I will take the underground parking lot. You and Madeline take the east side exit. Head straight for the federal building. The files need to reach a court judge before Langston's people can stop us. Madeline nodded, gripping the flash drive tightly. We'll meet you there. Margaret hesitated, then cupped Ethan's face briefly. Be careful, son. Ethan forced a smile. You too, Mom. As soon as they split, Ethan and James hurried down a stairwell leading to the courthouse parking garage. The underground lot was dimly lit, rows of parked vehicles casting long shadows. A sudden noise footstep. Ethan grabbed James's arm and pulled him behind a pillar just as two men in dark suits entered, scanning the area. Langston wants them alive. One man muttered. But if they run, we make it look like an accident. James whispered. That's comforting. Ethan gritted his teeth. We need a car. James pointed to a sleek black sedan with a federal court emblem on the side. That one? If we drive a government vehicle, they won't risk shooting at us. Ethan nodded. We just have to get to it first. They moved carefully, keeping low. But just as they reached the car, one of the men spotted them. There they are. A gun cocked. James yanked open the car door while Ethan dove inside. Tires screeched as bullets ricocheted off the pavement behind them. James floored the gas. "Hold on!" The sedan shot forward, crashing through the parking lot exit barrier and onto the main road. Ethan twisted in his seat, watching as the men sprinted for their own vehicle. "They're following," he growled. James tightened his grip on the wheel. "Then let's make sure they regret it." The streets of New York blurred as they sped toward the federal building. Behind them, Langston's men weaved through traffic, their black SUV gaining on them. Ethan gritted his teeth. "We can't lead them straight to the court offices." James swerved sharply, taking a sudden turn into an alleyway. "We lose them first, then we go." The SUV skidded, barely missing the turn. Ethan exhaled in relief until a second car appeared at the other end of the alley. "They knew we'd run," James muttered. The SUV blocked their exit, trapping them. The men stepped out, weapons drawn. James cursed. "Now what?" Ethan glanced at the glove compartment, spotting a federal court ID badge left behind by the car's previous owner. An idea hit him. "Play along," he whispered. He grabbed the badge and threw open the door. "Federal Court Special Investigator. Drop your weapons." The men hesitated. James stepped out beside him. "You really want to shoot two federal agents in a government car? Cameras are everywhere." The bluff worked for a second. Then one of the men smirked. "Nice try." Ethan had no time to think. He grabbed a metal trash can lid and threw it like a shield, knocking the nearest gunman off balance. James lunged at the other, tackling him to the ground. A punch landed hard against Ethan's ribs, but he didn't stop. He twisted, knocking the gun from the man's hand and sending it skidding across the pavement. James grabbed Ethan's arm. "Go! Now!" They sprinted back to the car, tires screeching as they sped off. The men scrambled to their feet, but it was too late. Ethan gasped for breath. "We get to the court and end this. Tonight." James nodded grimly. "Agreed." They raced toward the federal court building, knowing it was their only chance to bring Langston down for good. The federal court building loomed ahead, its towering columns illuminated against the dark New York sky. Ethan barely felt his aching ribs as James maneuvered the car into the restricted lot. The chase, the ambush in the alley, it all led to this moment. Inside, security guards eyed them suspiciously as they sprinted toward the main entrance. James flashed his attorney ID. "We have urgent evidence for the federal court judge. This is a matter of legal integrity." The guards hesitated, then one of them nodded. "Judge Harris is still in his chambers. 5th floor." Ethan and James took the stairs 2 at a time. Every second counted. As they neared the judge's office, Ethan's phone buzzed. A message. "Turn back, or your mother faces consequences." Ethan's blood turned ice cold. He skidded to a halt, turning to James. "They have my mother," James muttered under his breath. "They're trying to stop us." Ethan's fingers clenched around his phone. "If I don't stop now, they'll harm her." James grabbed his shoulder. "Listen to me. If we don't deliver these files to the court, Langston wins. And if he wins, your mother's still in danger." Ethan's breathing was ragged. He knew James was right, but the thought of his mother being used as leverage made his stomach twist. Then another thought hit him. Margaret Carter had never been one to break under pressure. She had walked into that courtroom and challenged an unfair ruling without blinking. She wouldn't want him to stop now. Ethan took a deep breath. "Let's end this." They burst into Judge Harris's office, startling the older man who had been reviewing case files. "Mr. Carter?" Judge Harris frowned. "Why are you here?" James didn't waste a second. "Your Honor, we have undeniable proof that Ethan Carter was framed, and that Victor Langston has been influencing court decisions, altering records, and interfering with key witnesses, including the attempted removal of Judge Whitmore." Harris sat up straighter, his expression hardening. "That's a serious accusation." Ethan placed the flash drive on the judge's desk. Everything is in there. Offshore accounts, falsified court documents, wire transfers to compromised officials. This isn't just about me anymore. Langston has been altering the court system for years. Judge Harris took the drive, inserting it into his laptop. His eyes flickered across the screen as he read the files. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the computer. After what felt like an eternity, Harris exhaled. He looked at Ethan, then James. This is enough. Langston will be formally investigated. The court hearing will be scheduled immediately. Ethan's chest tightened with relief. It was over, until a loud noise echoed through the hall. James spun toward the door. They're here. Ethan's pulse pounded. We need to get to my mother. Now. Judge Harris picked up his phone. I'm calling for federal security. Stay here. Ethan was already out the door. They sprinted down the halls of the court building, rounding a corner just in time to see Madeline struggling against two of Langston's men. And, behind them, Margaret, being held back. Langston stood between them, his calm smirk finally gone. You just couldn't let it go, could you, Ethan? He said smoothly. Ethan stepped forward. It's over, Langston. The court has everything. The judge is filing charges against you as we speak. Langston's jaw clenched. You think that matters? I still have influence. And influence doesn't come from the courtroom. It comes from control. Ethan took a slow step forward. Then you're losing control. Langston's expression hardened. That was all Ethan needed. He lunged. James tackled one of the guards, sending the man sprawling. Margaret twisted free, shoving her elbow into her captor's ribs. Madeline grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and swung it hard. Ethan wrestled with Langston, adrenaline surging through his veins. The struggle was chaotic, but Ethan managed to gain the upper hand, forcing Langston against the marble wall of the court hall. You betrayed my trust, Ethan said through gritted teeth. You tried to ruin my life. You threatened my family. Langston sneered, but Ethan saw at the flicker of uncertainty. The sound of footsteps thundered through the hall. Armed federal officers stormed in, commanding everyone to step back. Langston's men hesitated before lowering their hands in surrender. A lead officer approached. Victor Langston, you are being taken into custody for financial misconduct, obstruction of court justice, and other charges under federal investigation. Ethan stepped back, his breath unsteady. It was finally over. 2 weeks later, Ethan sat in the same courtroom where his nightmare had begun. But this time, it wasn't him on trial. The judge's voice rang through the room. After reviewing the evidence, this court finds Victor Langston responsible for multiple infractions and improper conduct. The gavel struck. Langston's face was pale, his once powerful presence reduced to nothing. Ethan exhaled, finally free. Margaret squeezed his hand. You did it. Ethan looked around the courtroom, at James, at Madeline. No, we did it. Justice had finally won. And, for the first time in months, Ethan Carter walked out of the courtroom a free man. As Ethan Carter steps out of the courtroom, victorious at last, one thing is clear: justice prevails when the truth is fought for. But this is just one battle. How far would you go to stand up for what's right? If you enjoyed this thrilling journey through power, corruption, and the fight for justice, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more gripping stories. Where in the world are you watching from? Let us know in the comments.